want to welcome everybody today. My name is Don Grostadier. I am the Director of Alternative Learning Services for Greenbush. I have just been with Greenbush for a little over a year now. Prior to that, I was superintendent of Eudora here for several years and was in this district a number of for many years before that. So we're real happy to have you here today. We want to talk to you today about something that we feel is a good alternative option to some of the problems that we think you're going to be facing in the next 5 years or so, if you're not facing those things already. And I think in many cases you already are. There are two things that we started taking a look at in the past year that we thought were really going to challenge districts. And these things have been around for a while, but they're just becoming worse. One of those is a constricting budget environment. You know, paying for the opportunities that we currently provide students or have provided students in the past is becoming a greater challenge each and every year. So that's one thing that we're focusing on. The second thing, and it's really starting to rear its head this year, are teacher shortages. You know, a lot of districts still have positions that they haven't been able to fill. And was visiting here a few weeks ago with the superintendent from Blue Valley Randolph, you know, which is around Manhattan. Not the most remote rural area you can find either. But they had an elementary opening this year. It had 4 applicants. 3 of those applicants had been non-renewed. You know, so it's not just the fact that people are struggling with getting applicants, it's getting good qualified applicants as well. And I know here at Eudora, when I was superintendent, there was a time when we would get 400 or 500 applicants for an elementary position. And I know now they're still getting good applicants, and they're getting a good number of those, but it's dropped down into the neighborhood of 100 applicants for elementary positions. So it's something that everybody's facing. You know, when we start talking about elementary teachers being on a short list for applications, we've got some serious teacher shortages. And those aren't going to get any better, because regardless of what happens with school finance and court cases and all that, the revenue picture in this state is bleak, to say the best. And so the next 5 years, it's going to take a while to turn things around, even if the political environment turns around. So we need to start thinking outside the box as to how we're going to address some of these issues that we face. And that's why we got together our alternative learning team here at Greenbush to start talking about some potential solutions for those issues. And I'm going to start off. I want to introduce the people that are part of our alternative learning team. And you may know these people. You may have worked with them in the past. And I'll tell you a little bit about what they do, because each one of these programs is kind of a solution in itself from an alternative standpoint. And then we're going to talk about one that I think people have really not taken a look at as an option, and that's a real blended learning environment. And that's what we're going to talk about and really focus on today. I want to start off, and I'll introduce our cameraman over here also, because we are filming this, by the way. This is Mark Dodge. And Mark is our Director of Distance Learning with Greenbush, and he does pretty much all of our IDL programming. Greenbush has been in the interactive distance learning business since 1989. And back in those days, to get into it, it was a pretty major investment, about $35,000 to outfit an IDL classroom. Well, those days are gone, okay? The technology, and we're using some of that technology today. I'll let Mark talk a little bit about that, but it's much cheaper. You know, you can set up, for less than $2,000, you can set up an IDL option. So Mark, you want to?
Sure. Now, as Don was saying, we can push the limits with IDL. With technology that's out there, with the online programs that we have available, we can outfit a classroom based on what you currently have. We can set you up with as little as $500 or as much as $2,800, depending on what it is you want to utilize within your school. We're able to set up with a high-quality HD program that's recordable, as we're doing today. It can be passed along, uploaded to YouTube, it can be shared. It allows for flip classroom. But the other side of it that it's really underutilized, and this is kind of the area that I'm looking to grow, is it can be utilized to bring your departments together. If you have schools in remote places where getting together is a difficult option, you can have a meeting online and do it instantaneously and meet everyone's schedule through a VHDP. We can also do some things about getting professional development to you through this distance learning format. All you really need is an internet connection, a webcam, and a browser. So distance learning goes beyond just what we provide to kids, but it also can be extended to the staff that you have.
Thanks, Mark. So that's one option that we would have to deal with some of these things. Another thing that we started, and we changed this, some of you may be familiar with our community learning centers that we've had over the years. And we've had community learning centers across the eastern part of the state that have served both as alternative placement for high school students, but then also adult diploma completion. Well, with the changes in the block grant formula, we made some changes in how our community learning centers operate. We no longer refer to them as community learning centers, but virtual learning centers. And the idea is to still provide those same types of services that we provided through the CLCs before, but now through the primary means virtually with on-site supports. In other words, we've taken a blended learning approach to our community learning centers. And Barb Gibson over here, but if you've been involved in community learning centers in the past, you may be familiar with Barb. She's been with us for quite a while now. And
13 years.
how many?
13.
13 years. So, and we've been in the community learning center business since when?
1997.
97? Okay. So we provide that, and that is generally, though, for alternative students. You know, that's kind of where we work with most of those students within that environment. Another person we have here is Nikki Troll, and Nikki is a program administrator for our virtual partnerships. And we have, what, about 40 virtual partnerships? 40 virtual partnerships across the state, the entire state of Kansas. And what the purpose of the virtual partnerships is it helps local school districts to establish their own virtual program. So in other words, you can have, and it can be a very small program, because a lot of our virtual partnerships don't really promote it. They don't use it a lot, but they use the partnership as kind of their alternative setting when they need it. But it allows you to set up a virtual program for your resident students within the state.
The comment that I used with the district just this morning was to have a virtual partnership doesn't require you to do anything. It gives you the option. So you may not have virtual students now, but at any given time, you may have a virtual student pop up or the option of a virtual student. And so in this lovely time of finance in the state of Kansas, did I say that very clearly? We actually can maintain more money for virtual students and acquire more money for that student than we can have brick and mortar students. It makes absolutely no sense, and I don't have any sense to make of it for you, but it is the truth in that. So one of the things that we have to think of is we do know that brick and mortar isn't for every child, and we have different instances and opportunities to look at. So one of the things that we also want to do is we want to bring funds back to your district. So I've worked at targeting throughout this year and having conversations with homeschool families and homeschool students to bring them back within the district, bring those dollars back to the district, and maybe redevelop some partnerships and things of that nature. And Don's going to talk about some blended where we can talk brick and mortar / virtual today. There's a lot of neat things that we have the opportunity that we can.
And then last but not least, we have Melanie Johnson. And if you've been involved with Greenbush Online at all, or even the virtual partnerships, you probably talked at least to Melanie on the telephone, because Melanie does all of those things for us down at the main campus in Greenbush, coordinates it all. And if there's one thing that I hear whenever I talk to anybody, It's the service level that Melanie provides. Everybody says, oh, Melanie's great. If I have a question, oh, we're getting an applause right there.
She takes money for that.
Yeah, I think she tipped Brett when he came to the door. Nonetheless, Melanie is, if not always the face of it, she's the voice of those programs because she is the boots on the ground that provides that service. And it's interesting because what we're really going to talk about today, we're talking about more from a Greenbush Online perspective than from these other program perspectives. Okay? We're talking about blended. The programs that we've talked about up to this point, you want to think about those students from an alternative perspective. Those students were alternative students, not traditional high school students. What we want to talk about with the blended high school is talking about your traditional high school students and the opportunities that you provide those students, okay? And those could be elective offerings. Those could be dual credit offerings with a post-secondary institution. We're looking at those types of things and giving you more options for those kinds of students, okay? Traditional brick and mortar students. So, okay, Mark, I'm not, oops, there we go. I want to start off with just some definitions and some things and talk through a little bit of that. And if these are all things that you're well aware of, you know, I apologize. But I want to make sure that we're kind of on the same page as we go through and talk about definitions, because virtual programming, online programming, it can get confusing sometimes, okay? And particularly with some of the changes that were made in regards to the block grant. So we want to make sure that we've got the right definitions as we talk about it. So let's start off with what blended learning is, okay? It's a formal education program in which a student learns at least in part through online delivery of their content, okay? And I'm going to talk about the difference between online and virtual because that's a key component in this as well. But part of this is that they have some element of student control over time, place, path, and or pace, and at least in part at a supervised brick and mortar location away from home. There's a key piece in there about the student has a lot of control, a lot of choice over the time, over the place, over the method, okay? And that's something that's kind of hard sometimes from a traditional mindset, you know, giving up some of that control. And that's what you have to be willing to do in a blended environment. Let's take a look at the difference between online versus virtual learning, because these are terms that are often used together. And people think about online learning, they think, well, that's virtual, okay? Well, from the state of Kansas perspective, that's not necessarily the case. And that's when we start getting into the importance of the definition from a funding perspective, okay? So there's a lot of confusion about that sometimes. Education in which instruction and content are delivered primarily over the internet, okay? That's online. And many of you maybe are doing that. Maybe you've been doing it for years. You might have an Edgenuity lab or an Odysseyware lab or some sort of lab where students report to second hour, let's say, of the day, and they go there every single day. But their content is delivered online. That's online learning, not necessarily virtual learning. Okay, so the key to determining if an online learning program is truly a virtual program and then eligible for virtual funding is based upon the asynchronous nature of the program. Okay, and that's a big word. Dr. Peter told me here one time that was too big a word for Osage County.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at the difference then between synchronous and asynchronous. It was too big a word for me a year ago too. I never heard of it. Okay, synchronous learning is online learning in which the participants interact at the same time and in the same space. So if you've got an Edgenuity lab let's say, and your students are reporting to that lab, second hour, every day of the week for the semester, and, and they're expected to have their content completed by the end of the semester, and they're graded that way and everything, that's synchronous, okay? Because they can't make a choice as to when they do that work. They report there every day on schedule. Asynchronous learning is a student-centered teaching method. It uses the online learning resources, okay, but they determine the time. They determine the location, okay? They have access to it. Just simply put, it's 24/7 access to curriculum and instruction, okay? If they want to log on at 3 o'clock on a Friday morning, they can do that, okay? If they want to log on at midnight on a Monday, they can do that, okay? And think about it. A lot of students work after school. They go to work. They get off with the Dairy Queen at 10 o'clock, and they go home. They log on and do their work for that class after they get off. They have that flexibility, okay? Now, that may not work for every student, but that's part of this. It's given up a little bit of that control. So virtual learning is asynchronous learning. And the other thing is it's a shift from a whole group mindset to a real personalized form of learning. You're looking at one student at a time and figuring out what best suits them. It's not a whole group thing, okay?
Don?
Yep.
Can you still have the drop dead date and provide the room, but still allow for 24/7
Yes.
to be virtual?
Yes. And it comes down, it comes down to what you require, okay? What you require in terms of on-site time. The virtual requirements say that you cannot require a student to be on-site for more than 50% of their program time. So you figure out what their program time is, and then you can't exceed half of that program time for the week, let's say, okay, or for the day. Okay, so you could say, let's say you had you set this up as a virtual class, you could require that a student, maybe they're taking one class virtually. Okay, you could require that they come on site twice a week.
Okay. It couldn't be a 5-day a week.
No.
You're in this schedule.
No. Now the other piece is the keywords are required there. Okay. Could you offer a location that they could report to if they wanted to? Sure. Okay. Maybe they don't have full internet access, so they could report to the library or somewhere like that to work on it. Can't require it. Okay. Now you can require it if they're not making progress. And this is something we do in our virtual learning centers, for example. And keep in mind, we're dealing with alternative students in those settings. So making progress is a big issue, okay? So what we do in that case is if a student's not making progress, okay, we can put them on an intervention plan. And part of that intervention plan could be the requirement that they come on site up to 100% of the time. Now, once they're back up to making progress again, you got to release them back into the virtual. But there are ways that you can set this up. There's a lot of flexibility in how you set it up and still meet those requirements. Let's see. Okay. Whoops. Okay. What we're kind of talking about here today, there's a lot of different blended learning models. And one thing I did want to point out, and I didn't talk about this at the beginning, but I meant to, because some of this is just coming out. But you want to talk about, this type of programming has a lot of future, okay? ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, okay, that has now passed both houses of Congress and goes to the president next week, okay, for his signature. Did he sign it this morning? Oh, okay. I thought it was scheduled to go next. Okay, thank you, sir. Nonetheless, that's even better, okay, because now it's the law. Now it's the law. But there are a couple of things under this where blended learning programming, I think, really stands out. I know we've got a number of people here that come from rural areas that access can be an issue. You know, internet access and things like that. There's two pieces in this legislation that I think are going to be significant towards blended learning models. The first thing is there's supposed to be in the next 18 months a digital learning resources study that's going to take place, okay? And what they're trying to do there is they're going to analyze the student digital learning habits and resources, identify the barriers, and very specifically look at student access to digital resources outside of the classroom. So if you're from one of these communities where connectivity is a problem, that's one of the things they're going to look at, because the goal is to try to address that. And and that's where the second piece of this comes in. The legislation is going to have student support and academic enrichment grants. And I think in the first year of the legislation, there's something like $1.8 billion for these grants nationwide. And then it goes down to $1.6 billion for like the next 4 years. Okay? So there's going to be some money that's out there. These are going to be block grants that will be distributed through the state to districts. So, you know, but nonetheless, there's going to be some federal dollars that are available, whether or not our state accepts.
Yeah, we'll reject it.
But it will be there. But the things that they're looking at are things like infrastructure acquisition. Now, there's going to be limits on how much you can spend on that, but there's going to be some infrastructure acquisition pieces to that. And then, but if you look at that legislation, there are key phrases in it that I found that talk about this. Blended learning program, okay? You know, access types of things, and this whole idea of rural remote. It's interesting because I did this same presentation last week down in Southeast Kansas and had a group down there. And that was one of the things that came up was, well, in our situation, we don't have a lot of access, you know, when kids go home. So how can we make this work? You know, it's not as big a problem up in this area, but don't let that be a barrier, because there are ways to figure it out and come up with access. So, but in the long run, there's supposed to be some dollars that are out there that are going to make this a little more accessible, I think, for everyone. But what we're talking about, and there's a lot of different ways, blended learning. If you start looking at research on blended learning, you're going to find a lot of different things, a lot of different models. But the model that we're talking about, I think, fits a traditional high school, and it's a self-blended virtual model, okay? So the way this works is students are just going to attend traditional school but take one or more of their classes online, okay? Let's talk about your traditional students again. Okay? We're not talking about alternative students. We're talking about your traditional students. And somebody asked me when I was down in Southeast Kansas, they said, well, who's the school that's doing this? Well, we have schools through Greenbush Online that are doing this, okay? They're accessing Greenbush Online courses, but they're not necessarily doing it virtual, okay? They're doing that traditional lab thing where you report to the lab every day, okay? Okay, so it's not really a full blended model. Nobody's really doing that, okay? You can be cutting edge here. So we're talking about online classes that are asynchronous by design. Okay, we just talked about that, the difference between asynchronous and synchronous. And as a result, they're eligible for state virtual aid. Okay, now the thing that I do have to clarify on this, and somebody may ask the question and say, well, how long is it going to be this way? Okay, well, we're going off the proposition that the block grant's going to be here next year, okay? And that this is not going to change within the block grant, okay? It's already changing because part-time virtual aid under the block grant this year is percent FTE of 40-45. Next year it drops to 1,700. Okay, so it's going to be less next year, but it's still supposed to be there. Okay. After that, okay. Well, if you can tell me what base state aid per pupil is going to be after next year, you're way ahead of me. Okay. So I can't tell you what it's going to be for virtual the year after that. So when I give you, scenarios on what this looks like, I'm going on what I know right now. Okay? I'm not speculating on what can happen next year or the year after. I'm just going on what the law is right now, but I'm going to give you some. I'm going to show you that it won't matter what the law is. There are some savings that you can have within a scenario like this, regardless of whether or not you get one dime virtual. Yes, sir.
Would the classes have to be, I'm thinking of my second semester senior student who's maybe taking 2 or 3 courses of online college classes, and they're not necessarily classes that show up in that student's schedule at Silver Lake, but they're still one of our students. They're college level classes, they're not high school classes, and we grant them access to our building to come work on them. Would that qualify?
Well,
Let
me get back to your question.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. We can make it full.
Okay.
We like the way
You're on the right. You're on the right sec. You're going in the right direction. Right?
Almost.
That's good. Okay. So the online courses are asynchronous. Now, one of the things, and this is from a policy standpoint, and this is entirely, all of this is flexible to what your situation is, how your board views things, your community. You can set this up however you want to set it up. Okay, but I think some of the things that you need to think about, we'll talk about it in the packet that I gave you. I put one in there called blended learning. Virtual learning in a box, okay? It's just things that you probably need to think about ahead of time. Because if I've learned, I've been with Greenbush a little over a year now, and from the virtual side of things, I've learned that a lot of districts are not prepared for these things up front. So you want to think about these things before you jump into the pool, okay? So, and it's things like district dual enrollment policies. Do you have a policy that allows students to be part of virtual programming on one end, and still, because they're primarily brick and mortar students, still allows them to participate in activities? There's the CASHA policy, okay? But the CASHA policy pushes it back on you, okay? CASHA just says that what they will accept is student passes 5 classes like they always have, but only one of those classes has to be brick and mortar. Yeah, that's what the simple CASHA policy is right now. And now that could change because there's been pressure on CASHA to go full blown, allow homeschoolers and everybody else to participate. But that's what it is right now. So you want to think about it from the perspective of what's our board policy look like? Not only board policy, but then what do our handbook policies look like? And we've got some suggestions, things for you to look at. I put policy language in there and say do this. You need to talk to KSB or your board attorney and those types of things. But these are things you need to think about. And the other side of this is too, and I ran into this here at Eudora, because at the time we didn't have a virtual program, okay? But we had students that were taking some of our brick and mortar classes and they were enrolled in an outside virtual school, okay? And then they were wanting to participate. Well, our old policy was 5, you got to pass 5 classes. Well, some people pushed that with the board. The board said, well, if Keisha has that policy, we need to go with that. Okay, so we altered our policy to allow for that. Now, the board has to approve that on a case-by-case basis, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But the other thing is, too, if you have your own virtual program, you could require that they be part of your virtual program.
That's how we handle it.
Yeah.
We won't accept Lawrence virtual.
There you go.
And that was back in the day that you got paid by kid.
Right.
They were getting the money and we were providing service. But we had a lot more come into our virtual program. Yeah. Couple anyway.
Good testimony. All right, so think about those dual enrollment policies. That's certainly something that you want to think about as you go through this. What are the benefits of a blended high school? Students are better prepared for participation in the online learning world. Vicki, I know this is a big one of yours. You want to add in on this?
When we think of the virtual world, there's a lot of things that are going on in that capacity. 21st century skills. Cindy, I know that's like right up your alley, things that you're doing, but one of the things that we want to think about is not only do we want to develop 21st century learning skills, which is technology, but there's the whole side. When you think of the 21st century, the 10 skills that the state has identified for that, only one of them really has to do with technology. A lot of it is problem solving, and it's really those thinking processes that we want to identify. But with that, we also want to identify how do we process and think in a virtual setting. Okay, so currently right now, I'm working on my doctorate through the University of Arkansas. And technically, I will only set foot on their campus 3 times when I graduate. I truly am a virtual learner with them. I sit in front of my computer. I know I finally caught the date and I did it. I know. Come on, jump on. I know. But there's those things that when I sit in front of a live class, and my class is live, but it's virtual. That's a whole different way to learn. I mean, it's been a challenge. I got brought up through my whole K-12 system in Fort Scott, Kansas, sitting in a chair in a classroom, all right? So to process that way, to think that way, to have to work with others that way, we do group time through that virtual system where they put us into rooms and we work and do different things. It's a new way to learn. Through Greenbush, through my job here, we do online meetings at times. We utilize GoTo. Mark, what's your system? Zoom is a good system that we have meetings that way. This is the part that we've met that way in this year. And so when you think of being in that type of setting, truly making yourself stay engaged, truly making yourself be all the things you would, like you would sit in a room like this, it is a challenge. It's something that we all have to work on. So some of the things that I've thrown out to districts or I have said when we're truly thinking about 21st century preparation for students, are we preparing them virtually? Whether it's through they're going into a profession and they're going to have to utilize that through their profession, or whether they're going on to college and needing virtual. Colleges are doing more online courses all the time. I was just working with a teacher in Fort Scott the other day, but he's getting ready to start his building level administration. And they are doing what they call a hybrid. They have part online classes, part where they go in and sit in class through Pittsburgh State. So it's a mix. Well, he came to sit down with me because unfortunately he is a former student of mine and he wanted my opinion whether I thought he could do that. He didn't know if he was focused enough to handle the virtual side of it. And so, and that was a really great thing for me to think about and think, okay, how can we prepare him to be able to do that? So, I really urge you to think about, could we have a virtual component as a graduation requirement in our high schools where they do a class virtually and we guide them through that? Again, providing them with that true 21st century preparation. And it's uncomfortable. I see you guys, I just said that, and a lot of people got really uncomfortable in the room. And that, honestly, it truly is a challenge. But we have to think, what's our job as the K-12 education system? Is to prepare those kids for what they're going to do next. And right now, things are advancing in the virtual setting faster than what we're probably comfortable with. So just something for you to think about.
I think there are 5 states across the country now that have that as a state requirement. You know, don't ask me what all 5 of them are. Michigan, I'm pretty sure, is one of them. They've had it for quite some time. Florida is another one. But you know, it's coming. It's coming down the pipe. Like I said, when you see blended learning all over this latest reauthorization, you know, it's going to happen sooner or later. You know, elements of student control, more student-centered learning experiences. You know, think about, you know, everybody's starting to wrap their minds around developing individual plans of study. You know, having greater flexibility as to how you do that and the things that you offer within that. This is a possibility. Greater opportunities for course offerings, you know, and we'll talk about that. In your packet, I put in a handout on all the Greenbush online virtual courses that we offer. And, you know, you can develop an a la carte menu based on that. We're not suggesting that you take that course guide and throw it to your students and say, have at it. But thoughtfully going through that and looking at the courses that we have to offer, where we, you know, in that scenario, we offer the online learning platform and the instructor, qualified instructor. Okay? Looking at that thoughtfully. Where do we get our biggest bang for the buck out of this? You know, that's a piece. And then dual credit opportunities. Okay? We've entered into an agreement with Fort Scott Community College. And you might say, well, why Fort Scott Community College? Well, Greenbush has long-standing history with Fort Scott Community College. They are part of our founding board. So we're going to provide dual credit opportunities through Fort Scott online starting in the fall. And there's another handout in your packet that shows some of the courses that are going to be offered. These are courses that are accepted by all of the region schools across the state. And there's some SB 155 courses in there also as well. But, and there may be more than those offered. But initially, that's what we're looking at. And some of those will be offered through Greenbush Online directly, okay, with our instructors. Some of those will be offered through Fort Scott directly with their instructors using their platform. But they'll be through Greenbush Online. The enrollment part will be through Greenbush Online. And that's a key piece because that gets back to your question. Okay, now I'm getting there. The question was asked, well, what about these dual credit offerings if our kids are taking online courses? Will they count? Well, if you have your own virtual program established, okay, and it's approved by the state of Kansas, yes, okay, as long as those are running through your virtual program. If you don't, you have to have an approved virtual program for them to count. Greenbush Online is an approved virtual program. And those of you that maybe have been part of the partnership over the years or something else, you know that there's a process you have to go through. If it's a new process, you have to file an intent with the state. And then once you do that, you have to go through an audit process, okay? Well, if you're a Greenbush virtual partner, we help you with that. We provide you resources and give you some technical support. But you still have to do it yourself. Now, if you're a virtual learning center, you don't have to do it at all because our virtual learning centers are approved virtual programs. And here's the good part. Greenbush Online, because of Melanie's work, is an approved virtual program of KSDE.
No, or what you're talking about right now, you're talking about virtual funding tied to that, because
Exactly.
you can still go the other way
and
do the dual credit just from the
absolutely.
the JUCO
Absolutely.
call 4-year.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about tying it to the funding aspect of it. Okay. All right? So yeah, that's a very good point, because yeah, you can do it the other way, but if you want to qualify virtually and get some virtual funding, you've got to go through that. So that's something that we've got starting next year, next fall, we'll be able to provide that. And nobody's asked the question here yet, but came down south. Well, you know, our territorial arrangement is with Pitt State, or our territorial arrangement with Johnson County. Doesn't matter. This is virtual, okay? There are no territories when it comes to virtual, okay? Your students can accept that. And then we'll have, so your board, you know, you'll want something for your board to know that you're partnering with Fort Scott Community College in Greenbush to get that dual credit. We'll have, you know, Fort Scott's working on it now, just a little short agreement that you could have your board approve and sign, and then you could use that. Now, go ahead.
On the you're tied with Fort Scott.
Right.
We tend to do all our stuff with Allen County. Can our virtual school then form an agreement with Allen County to do the same thing, or can Greenbush add another school as a partner onto that?
We could.
Because
Yeah.
if we took our kids and put them in Fort Scott, they don't have 12 hours, and Allen County's scholarshiping most of our second semester juniors and seniors.
Yeah. There might be, yeah, there are probably some ways that we do that. But here's the key piece that I want to point out in terms of the dual credit opportunities, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware of this. You know, concurrent credit, right? How many of you have a concurrent credit program? What's the difference between concurrent to dual credit?
Concurrent is offered at our high school by our teachers.
What's the problem going to be with that going forward?
Certification.
Yeah. The requirements are being upped significantly starting next fall, okay? For those concurrent credit programs, your teachers have to have a master's degree and 18 hours of graduate credit in the content that they're going to teach. That's pretty tough. I mean, unless you have a teacher that has a content master's degree, or they've been around long enough that they've just taken all kinds of graduate content courses, you're not going to find that. Because how many of us have master's degrees in our content as teachers? Generally, it's counseling, it's administration, it's curriculum instruction. You know, we go everywhere but the content. So going forward, that's going to be an issue. And if you're not aware of that and you haven't looked at that, you probably need to go back and take a look at your concurrent credit program that you have and check on those teachers that are participating in that, because as of next fall, that may be history. Okay? So this is an option to deal with that. Credit recovery options. You know, and I threw this in there because we do credit recovery through our virtual learning centers for a lot of districts. Baldwin is doing some credit recovery stuff with us. But we can also do that through Greenbush Online. And typically it's at a much reduced rate to what we charge for the other classes because, you know, the content is generally reduced in those scenarios. And then the opportunity for additional funding through part-time virtual participation. You know, just thinking about this in terms of changes to the traditional model, you know, allowing students greater freedom in on-site attendance. You know, not expecting them to attend every day of every hour, okay? You know, it's allowing, you know, and thinking of it, and I know these things are hard to wrap around. I can remember years ago going through discussions about open lunch periods, you know, and what a problem that was. But look at it this way. If you have a traditional schedule, you know, 7-period day, schedule a kid for a virtual period first hour, or schedule them for a virtual period 7th hour. Okay, they come late or they leave early. And maybe you want to do what Steve was talking about. Maybe you want to require them to come in one day during that time to meet with somebody and make sure that they're on progress. That's fine. You can do it. But, you know, I don't know. Maybe I'm simple-minded. So maybe, you know, and I haven't done a ton of scheduling in my lifetime, but it just doesn't seem that difficult to me. Okay?
Have you had conversations with other school districts? We instituted an online learning lab about 3 years ago, and the last year between the 2 semesters, we had right at 100 classes taken virtually or online, if you will. And the one concern we had going into that, which has panned out to be a major concern, is the our other on-site elective classes are taking a huge hit in enrollment. And so one of the concerns we have is the more we open this up, you know, one could argue, well, the students are taking what they want to take. But is there a happy medium in there, I guess, between, you know, giving students flexibility and having this opportunity versus cannibalizing your own staff?
Well, and I think it gets back to what you know, I don't have a silver bullet on that one, but what it gets back to is, I mean, look at this, guys, our priorities, look at the sports guy. You know, we got Edgenuity and we got Fuel Ed. Some of them are the same, but you know, Fuel Ed used to be a Venta, and people that use that a lot of different times, and they like that better than they do Edgenuity. So you know, we try to provide people with what they want. Okay, but you know, this is a pretty comprehensive course guide. There's core classes in here, there's career tech ed classes in here, and there's elective classes. But we're not suggesting that you just throw this out there and say, take anything you want. So I think you're on track. You need to have some thoughtful discussions with your staff and with your administration in terms of what do we want to offer. Because you can limit it. There's nothing that says you can't limit what they have available. You know, take a look at the things that you don't currently offer because of lack of licensure from your staff or things like that. You know, focus on those types of things and ask questions. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think you're on the right track. You need to have that kind of a discussion. That's what I meant with don't just throw this out there and say, have at it. Because that will create the problem.
Yeah, we put the limits on, you know, if it's something we offer face-to-face, then we'll do it virtually.
Because that, you know, look at it that way. You guys know where this comes up with. You've got a math teacher that nobody likes, and they get in the class anyway. And the next thing you know, oh, I'm going to take a virtual class. I have to deal with quarterbacks. Right? You're not even a math teacher. Oh, okay. And it's doctoral. That's lots has changed. Lots has changed.
Now, Don, isn't this also being used by some districts? I won't say they're small, but the one that jumps out at me is Kingman. Kingman's fairly nice size, but they also have Norwich that is about 30 miles to the south. Heavy declining enrollment. Right. They've been doing this for 2 to 3 years to keep the Norwich side open, where they do math, and there could be 5 or 6 different math things going on in there.
Right. Absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. I think more of us are going to face those kinds of things. You know, there's a little district down in southeast Kansas that has a K-12 faculty of 22. Okay? Of those 22 people, 14 of them are working after retirement. So if the legislation doesn't change, they're either going to have to do something like this or they're going to close the door. Okay? On working after retirement. So yeah, I mean, you know, that's what we're trying to get across is, look at this, not for alternative students, but as an alternative for traditional students. Okay? Now let's talk about, I know some of you here, are thinking about the funding piece of this. So I want to just talk a little bit here about virtual funding. We talked a little bit about it. In a blended or part-time virtual model, a student might attend 300 minutes in the brick and mortar building, and let's say 60 minutes in a virtual setting, okay? And the way they look at it from a virtual standpoint, if you've done any of this with your audits recently, you know what I'm talking about. If they're part-time students, they're going to look at the brick and mortar minutes first, okay? So whatever you count in the brick and mortar minutes, that's your starting point. Then they're going to take a look at the virtual minutes after that. So let's say we got somebody that's 300 minutes brick and mortar and then 60 minutes in the virtual program. Because, 360 minute day, that's what they base it on in the audit. So part-time virtual state aid next year is percent of FTE times 1,700. So that works out to roughly $283 per 60 minutes of virtual time. Okay? So if you set this up as virtual courses, asynchronous in nature, do all those things we talked about, that's what you're going to get next year. Okay? Current for next year. That's all I can base it on, okay? Now, some of the things too, and we talked through this a little bit, you have to accept the rigor of online courses too. And if you've done anything in Edgenuity or any Steel Ed courses, rigor is not typically an issue. Sometimes the issue may be a little too rigorous for some students. Okay? So allowing virtual students the same opportunities as their brick and mortar counterparts. We're talking about student opportunities here. We're not talking about restricting people or trying to put them in a box. We're talking about opening it up and allowing them to have as many opportunities as they can. So, it's doing it right and looking at it from that philosophy is allowing them to go to the school day. We're talking traditional students that are going to probably be in the brick and mortar building more than they are virtually. But you might have some kids that, are pushing the envelope in terms of the number of classes that they're taking. So you want to have your policies, your dual enrollment policies in place. And then acceptance of dual credit courses with accredited colleges. Whether it's Allen County or whoever, or Fort Scott Community College, having that as an opportunity for your students, I think is important. Now, what can we provide in this? There are different ways to do it, but this is, if we did this through Greenbush Online, we can provide you all of these course offerings that we have here through Edgenuity or Fuel Ed, your choice, okay, with a highly qualified teacher, okay, and it's what our charge is. And this year we're actually charging $275. So we're cutting it down $5. Give me a break. But $270 per semester, half credit course. The dual credit course options with Fort Scott are going to be $90 per college credit hour. And most of those are 3 college credits. So they're $270 also. And that covers all the tuition and enrollment. If it's greater than 3 hours, then it's another $90 for each hour. KSD approved virtual program that allows you to receive virtual funding for each qualified student meeting the virtual requirements. Okay? So you don't have to have your own program agreement to do that. And we can do all the work with that. Yes, sir.
Does Fort Scott have any requirements as far as
I think they have that, but my understanding was that some of this, they're looking at juniors and seniors. I think that might be. They haven't they're still kind of talking about that in terms of whether or not they're going to require that. So, but traditionally they do.
Yeah, they have for the 90 per credit hour is everything, including online fees, those kind of things. Charge or college charge.
That's an all-encompassing fee for the program. Now, if there's supply fees and things like that, and when you get into some of those CTE classes, you have those are above and beyond that. But that's the cost. Okay. Course options, we talked a little bit about that, so I'm just going to go through it. Now let's take a look at this from a finance standpoint, because if you're looking at this, we talked through it already. Get $283 per 60 minutes of virtual. The students have to be counted during the count day windows. Okay, you still got to go through count day for these students in the fall. So you're going to have to count them for that 60 minutes in the first window, which actually, from a virtual standpoint, starts July 1 and runs till September 20th, and then September 21st to October 5th is that second window. Okay, you got to get a 60-minute count from that too. And that's time not counted in the brick and mortar building. Okay? It has to be asynchronous in nature, and you're limited to required attendance to half the program time. Yes, sir?
So a kid can't get in this that semester.
Well, not to get funded. Okay? Let's go on. Hold that thought. Hold that thought, because you're not going to get funding for it. Okay, you're going to get 283, and you're probably saying, well, that only pays for half of it, right? Because we're saying 270. Let's look at this from another perspective, because like I said, we're looking at it from a perspective of finance and staffing, okay? There may be some savings in staffing costs here too that you want to consider. So let's take a look at a scenario. One elective teacher in a smaller brick and mortar school with a single licensure, Spanish. And I'm not picking on Spanish teachers. I have nothing against Spanish teachers. But we get calls all the time about people needing Spanish. Okay? We've got, what, 2 IDL Spanish teachers? Mm-hmm. We've got 2 IDL Spanish teachers. We get calls all the time about Spanish. So that's why I'm using that as a scenario, because it is a hard to fill position. So let's say you got a smaller brick and mortar high school, and that one Spanish teacher may teach approximately 50 students in a semester. Okay? Well, let's assume this teacher is going to cost us approximately $50,000 as a full-time teacher. Okay? Roughly $50,000. Some less, some more. So we'll settle on $50,000. If we take those 50 students and we enroll them first semester in one virtual course, and then we come back second semester and we enroll them again, we've got 100 courses for those 50 students, and that's what we're charging. So $270 per course for those 100 courses is $27,000. And this is outside of any type of virtual funding. So in a scenario like that, you're looking at $50,000 versus $27,000. I'm not telling you to go out and fire a bunch of teachers this is necessarily a better way to go than having a face-to-face teacher. But what I'm telling you is, in this scenario, there's a cost savings there that has to be considered when you're trying to figure out how many opportunities you're going to be able to provide your students. Now, let's say we can get some virtual state aid here. If we count those 50 students for 60 minutes a day, we're getting $283. We're going to generate $14,150 in state aid for those 50 kids. So our scenario now was $27,000. We're getting state aid back. That cost is now down to $12,850.
And really, the only carrot that you've added there is they get the time in front of them. Instead of the control factor.
So you're getting 100 classes in a school year for $12,850 at that $270 per class. Okay? That's not, that's not something that's completely unaffordable.
But that's under the assumption that you're completely eliminating the face-to-face opportunity for Spanish in this particular scenario for Spanish. So a student has no option other than online.
And it's not so much that you're getting rid of it, may not find.
Yeah.
That's what most of them that are doing this now. They
Right.
can find
You may not find it.
I will tell you, Spanish is the most sought after IDEO course that we have. For that reason, it's hard to fit in there.
Where is he in Spanish?
They are getting, yes, they are doing IDEO. They're doing IDEO.
idea.
Okay. Now, and you raise a good point, because something I'm going to talk about here down the line is how do we ensure success? And one way that we want to do that is to have some on-site progress on. We're not providing that for $270. So, yeah, you may be paying somebody a little something else to monitor those virtual students, but you're still going to be well within $50,000.
And are all these classes, aren't some online classes not accepted by the NCAA?
Here's the sticker on the NCAA. That's a great question. Yeah, here's gone through some things with the NCAA recently. So I know a little bit about some. Here's the deal. Virtual classes will count, but they have to be approved. And there's two things that they look at. One is the course, where in Edgenuity they're all approved. So we've got that piece covered. The other piece is there has to be a face-to-face component. Okay? So if you do have face-to-face component where they come in on site once a week and get checked on, you could get them passed by the NCAA, and you have to do that. We don't do that for you. But yeah.
Hey, Don, along those lines, you want to talk about the Regent Scholar?
Oh yeah, Regent Scholar. We had another question similar to that. Somebody asked whether or not these courses would count towards Regent Scholar. And Mark, you did some research on that, so you want to add into that?
Barbara and I gave a call to the state and talked with Diane Lindeman, and there's two components that need to be, one of two components need to take place. Number one, the transcripting institution needs to be the school district where the child is attending. And two, if it's a virtual program, it needs to be one that's approved by the state. In this situation, all three of our distance learning programs, be it IDL, Greenbush Online, or blended virtual, all meet those requirements. We do not transcript, and our virtual program is approved by the state. So these do qualify. Now, the Scholars program, as you know, it just because they qualify from the school's program perspective does not necessarily mean that they will qualify for the scholarships, because there's also a financial need component that's involved. It's two-pronged.
And that's the way all of our programming, okay, we work with you to transcript everything, whether that's virtual partnership, Greenbush Online, virtual learning center. We send you the course completions, and then it's your responsibility to transcript those. Okay? So that's covered. Like Mark said, you got to have an approved virtual program, which Greenbush Online is. So we got that piece covered. Okay, how do we ensure success? One of the things we're working on right now, and I don't really have this to give you, but we're looking at trying to develop a screening tool to help you screen, because I think, a question you want to ask is, is this student going to be successful in a virtual environment, a virtual class? Well, there are tools a lot of post-secondary institutions use that, can help you determine whether or not they at least meet some of the criteria to be successful. We're trying to develop one that we would look at for secondary students, so that you could have something that you could use to screen them a little bit to determine whether or not they would be successful. You may want to give them the opportunity, you may want to have conversations with them, all those things, but at least it gives you some data to have for that conversation. The other thing is, all the research looks at having clear student expectations and targets, everything up front. And since these are courses that you're going to transcript the same way you would your other semester courses, you're going to want to think about what's the deadline for completion of work. Does it follow the traditional calendar that they have to be completed by such and such a date? Or is it extended a little bit after? I mean, those are things you want to think about. But that needs to be very clear up front when students go in. And what are the targets? We through Edgenuity, you can set targets of completion. You got to have this much completed by this date, this much by this date. And our instructors do a lot of that with target dates and so on. And that helps to keep students moving towards progress. But you need to lay those things out ahead of time. So it comes down to having program handbooks. It may come down to having parent and student contracts that people sign off on. We've got templates for all of that kind of stuff. Okay? So we can help you with that. You need to fill it into your scenario, your setting. But we can help you with that and the things that you want to think about there.
Don, may I jump in on one?
Yeah.
On the progress monitoring piece, sometimes districts get a little nervous about how are we going to track all these kids, how are we going to watch them, things of that nature. They do have a teacher tied to them, but we also do give you as a district access to the system. In Ingenuity, the dashboard that we have makes it about one of the easiest things you can follow. You click on your dashboard, you can see all your students. But what it also does is it gives alerts when you have kids that haven't been meeting deadlines or doing certain things that you can go in. And it brings a lot of things to your attention and really takes the work out of having to go in and, I've got to look for this kid and I've got to find this and I've got to do this and these things. So it is a really user-friendly system for you to be able to track your students.
And keeping that in mind, depending on the numbers of students that you would have in a program like this, you might want to think about some on-site facilitator. We do ask that you have program contact and a backup program contact that we can communicate with you. And our teachers are really good about letting those people know when somebody's not making progress, okay? And we also do parent-teacher conferences once each semester for all virtual students, regardless. I mean, if they're in any of our virtual programs, we do that. So we try to do as much communicating with not only the parent and student, but with you also, okay, to make sure that you have that information.
Don, does your Greenbush's virtual program, does it follow the August to May calendar, or does it allow for kids to take classes all year round?
Well, we're pretty much,
Pretty flexible.
yeah, we're pretty flexible with Greenbush Online and everything. This year, going forward with our virtual learning centers, we pretty much in the past, we kind of shut things down at the virtual learning centers in June. Then we'll do like a summer school component and then close down pretty much the month of July. This year, we're probably not going to do that. We're probably going to run them through both June and July, and for two reasons. And it's a funding reason, rationale. Credit completion is the way we fund adults. Okay? That's the way adults are funded in the program. And it's any credit completed, okay, from July 1 to June 30. So the month of June, our adults can be generating credits, and we can still be generating revenue. Okay? The second thing is, for underage students, the virtual count windows open July 1. So we're looking to bring those students in July 1 to hopefully get that first count date completed in the summer. And so that we're not scrambling to get that completed in September.
Another thing to think about that with that also with students, for one, like Melanie said, we're very flexible on getting things going, and none is really on the ball about things of that nature. But your students, your full-time students, and I'm thinking under 19, so our high school age kids, they have to be enrolled in 6 full-time courses to be full-time virtual students. But what a lot of those students do is we enroll them in 6, but they truly only take 1 course at a time. So I'm going to start my biology, and I'm going to finish my biology, and then I'm going to go on to my next class, even though I'm enrolled in all of them at once. We found that some of them are a little more successful going about it that way than trying to work on all of them. So it gives them some flexibility within that too. But I know we've had some districts call us, you know, in the beginning of September, school's really already started, but now I've got a kid that needs to get in, and we can get them in. Like Dawn said, we want to meet our count days, and we've got some responsibilities there, but we're pretty flexible.
Okay, just real quick, some of the next steps from this point on to think about, and we'll get some lunch and have lunch and talk, and we'll wrap up with some questions at the end. You want to establish thoughtful policies. We talked about that. You know, now's the time to be thinking about those policies and working with your board for next year. Have this all in place prior to this. The next thing is you want to select those courses that students are going to be allowed to take. Having good conversations with everybody involved to make sure that the courses that you're offering, you're getting the biggest bang for your buck, basically, putting them down. And you're not taking away from your brick and mortar building. And then this is the piece, and this is why we wanted to talk to you now, okay? We wanted to get all this finished before Christmas, because we know when you come back, if you're not already starting that, you're talking about your schedule for next year. You're going to start those pre-enrollment processes and so on. What are those course options within your master's schedule? You know, like I say, if you want to get virtual aid, think about where those students are going to take it. Where are they going to get the time? If they come late, maybe they leave early. But setting it up in such a way that you're going to get that aid, okay? And then the other thing that you have to think about here, and we provide you everything you need to do this, but we can't do it for you, is the courses have to be mapped. They have to be mapped as virtual courses, okay? And with course codes, and we can provide you all that information. So you have to do that, and you have to submit accurate and timely records within the KIDS system, all the record keeping and all the submissions. And that's the ESD, EDS, EDCS, thanks, and the STCO, and all those wonderful acronyms. But we provide you all the information you need to do that. You know, it becomes data entry at that point, but somebody has to do that on your end, you know. Okay, we also, and I put this in your packet, we've got an MOU with Greenbush for virtual services. This is different than a partnership MOU. It's different than a virtual learning center MOU. It's outside of that, okay? But this is strictly, we've never required an MOU with Greenbush Online in the past. But the reason we're doing that is to put you in a position to get state aid. Because you have to have that to get the state virtual aid. So that's why we have that. To ensure that you have that connection to our approved program. Okay? And then the next thing, and this is where Melanie comes into play, like I said, she's the voice and face of all this. You would send her a list of the students, you know, after you've gone through your enrollment process, and you generate a list of students and classes that they would take. You'd send that to Melanie, and she would get them enrolled in Edgenuity or Fuel Ed, whichever way you wanted to go, and we'd set that up. Now, we put that enrollment deadline simply for the standpoint of virtual aid, because you got to hit those count windows. So you don't want to be enrolling students after September 15th if you want to get virtual aid. But if you don't care about the virtual state aid, it doesn't make a difference to us. You can enroll them at any time you want, okay? So
they just have to be enrolled by that date. Does that mean they have to be taking a class in the fall? Or if it's a semester
You don't
class,
have to be doing the time.
They have to do the time, so yeah.
so it has to happen in the fall.
Give me a thought, but I better hang on to it until I can flesh it out. That light bulb for a second there. So it may not be there, but it's not at all.
Okay, we got contacts. My contact information's on there, my cell phone number. You can get a hold of me on that anytime. If you have questions on the way home, you want to talk about it, give me a call. We've got email addresses for me and everybody else that's on the team that's here. If you want to talk to them about any of the programs that we talked about today, feel free to do that. And we have food over there, so please go ahead.
We focused everything at the high school level. Is that the only funding, or can junior high students under virtual classes fund the health level?
Yeah, we focused at the high school level, but yes, you could get funding at the junior high level.
Maybe even elementary?
Oh yeah, I mean,
Okay.
but not so much through not through Greenbush Online. We can't do elementary. We could go sixth grade. We could go 6 through 12 at Greenbush Online. But virtual partnership, if you get into a virtual partnership with us, we can do elementary because we've got that. It's a different curriculum. It's calculus.